Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
The rust bucket drifted silently through the sprawling graveyard of derelict vessels, its patched hull reflecting the distant starlight in dull, uneven patterns. Inside the cramped cockpit, Sam absently rubbed the stubble on his jaw as he scanned the void through the viewport, his eyes bloodshot from too many stims and too little sleep. The salvage scanner hummed softly, searching for anything worth risking his life for among the floating tombs. Sam wasn't always a scavenger. The scars crisscrossing his weathered face in the Alliance military tattoo faded on his forearm told a different story, one of discipline, honor, and ultimately loss. Now he picked through the bones of dead ships drifting in what scavengers called the Titan's graveyard, a massive asteroid belt filled with the husks of forgotten vessels. His own ship, the Rust Bucket, was just another piece of wreckage he'd saved from the scrapyard, held together by stubborn determination, mismatched parts, and excessive amounts of duct tape. The distress signal cut through the silence unexpectedly, a strange pattern that didn't match any standard protocol. Sam's console lit up with the irregular pulses, a sequence that repeated every 17 seconds. "What the hell?" he muttered, fingers dancing across the worn control panel. The signal wasn't a standard military or civilian code, just a short, intermittent burst that seemed almost deliberate in its irregularity. Curiosity tugged at him, that dangerous impulse he'd never quite managed to suppress despite how often it had nearly gotten him killed. Against his better judgment, Sam adjusted course, the Rust Bucket's engines groaning in protest as he navigated through a cluster of jagged asteroids toward the signal source. It took nearly an hour of careful maneuvering before he spotted it. The research vessel, Prometheus, a sleek corporate craft now sporting a massive rupture along its port side. Even from a distance, Sam could see it wasn't just burning. It was consumed by an unnatural green flame that crawled across the hull like a living thing, licking at the metal without burning through. "Sterilization protocol," Sam whispered, recognizing the telltale chemical fire. His grip tightened on the controls. Omnicorp, the vessel's owner according to the registry scan, was covering their tracks, erasing whatever experiments they'd been conducting out here, in the lawless fringe of space. Docking with the dying ship was a risk that even Sam questioned as he sealed his environment suit and checked his oxygen levels. The magnetic clamps engaged with a shudder, creating a tenuous bridge between the Rust Bucket and the Prometheus. He grabbed his plasma cutter and sidearm, both worn but reliable, just like their owner. "In and out," he told himself, his voice echoing in the emptiness of his airlock. "Quick salvage run, nothing more." The moment the airlock cycled open, Sam knew he'd made a mistake. The heat hit him like a physical blow, even through his insulated suit. The fire suppression systems were offline, and the unnatural green flames crawled along the walls and ceiling, consuming everything but the ship's structure itself. The corridor before him was a vision from hell, emergency lights casting crimson shadows through the smoke, the acrid smell of chemical fire leaking through his respirator. Bodies of scientists lay scattered across the floor, their lab coats charred, faces frozen in expressions of terror. Sam stepped carefully around them, sweeping his light through the thickening smoke. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been quick or painless. The distress signal grew stronger as he approached the central laboratory. The doors had been melted partially open, requiring Sam to use his plasma cutter to widen the gap enough to squeeze through. Inside, the heat was unbearable, the flames concentrated in an inferno at the center of the room. And there, in the heart of that raging fire, he saw her, a blue-skinned girl chained to an observation table with thick metal restraints. She was unconscious, her body fragile and almost translucent, her features delicate as if carved from ice. Most astonishing of all, the flames seemed to cause her no harm, dancing across her skin without leaving a mark. Sam stood transfixed, his mission forgotten. Around her, scattered data pads and specimen containers told a partial story. This was no rescue mission or medical evacuation. The girl had been a subject, an experiment. Something about the scene, a fragile life in the heart of destruction, touched a part of Sam's soul he thought the war had long since killed. He remembered other prisoners, other victims, on worlds whose names he tried to forget. "Not this time," he growled, stepping forward into the flames. The heat was excruciating, even through his suit. Warning alarms blared in his helmet as the external temperature sensors maxed out. Sam ignored them, pushing through the wall of fire to reach the table. Up close, the girl seemed even more fragile, her chest barely rising and falling with shallow breaths. With shaking hands, Sam activated his plasma cutter, the blue arc of energy slicing through her restraints one by one. The ship groaned around him, the hull integrity failing as the fire spread. An automated voice echoed through the intercom. "Reactor critical. Detonation imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately." Sam had seconds, not minutes. He hoisted the girl's weightless body onto his shoulder, surprised by how little she weighed, like carrying a child. Her skin was cool to the touch, despite the inferno surrounding them, an impossibility that Sam had no time to contemplate. The journey back to the rust bucket was a blur of smoke, flame, and desperately racing against the countdown that seemed to echo in Sam's head. Twice he nearly fell, the girl's limp form sliding from his grasp. Once he was certain they would both die when a section of corridor collapsed behind them, cutting off their retreat. But somehow they made it. The rust bucket's airlock sealed shut behind them just as Sam felt the first tremors of the Prometheus's failing reactor. He stumbled to the cockpit, the girl still clutched in his arms, and frantically disengaged the docking clamps. The engines screamed in protest as Sam pushed them beyond safe limits, putting as much distance as possible between his ship and the doomed research vessel. A moment later, the viewport automatically darkened as the Prometheus became a miniature star, the explosion rippling outward in a wave of superheated gas and debris. The rust bucket shuddered violently as the shockwave hit, systems flickering and alarms blaring, but the old ship held together, just as it always did. Sam exhaled slowly, slumping back in his pilot's chair as the adrenaline began to fade. He had saved her. He had no idea what a terrible mistake he had made. In the cold, sterile med bay of the rust bucket, Sam carefully placed the blue-skinned girl on the examination table. Her breathing was steadier now, but she remained unconscious, her face serene despite the hell they'd just escaped from. Up close, away from the green flames, her skin seemed deeper, more saturated, the color of a gas giant's atmosphere viewed from orbit. Sam ran a basic medical scan, the results confusing him further. The readouts flickered and changed, unable to get consistent readings on her physiology. Temperature, heartbeat, brain activity, all the values fluctuated wildly, as if her body couldn't decide what it was. "What were they doing to you?" he murmured, gently cleaning a smudge of soot from her face. Hours passed as Sam alternated between checking on his mysterious passenger and attempting to repair the damage the rust bucket had sustained during their escape. The ship's navigation system was offline. The long-range comms were fried, and the life support was functioning at minimal capacity. Just another day in the life of a scavenger. When he returned to the medbay for the 5th time, something had changed. The girl was still unconscious, but her blue skin rippled like the surface of water disturbed by a gentle breeze. As Sam watched, transfixed, a bone-like spike began to protrude from her shoulder blade, only to retract slowly back into her flesh. "What the hell?" Sam whispered, moving closer. Her lips parted, and she began to whisper names in her sleep, names that made Sam's blood run cold. Sergeant Miles, Medic Lena, Corporal Way... The names of his dead squad, names he hadn't spoken aloud in 5 years, names he'd never mentioned to her, or to anyone since the massacre. Sam backed away, his heart hammering against his ribs. "That's not possible," he breathed. The blue-skinned girl's body contorted suddenly, her back arching off the examination table. Her skin darkened in patches, hardening into something that resembled the carapace of an insect. Her fingers elongated, the tips sharpening into points that scraped against the metal surface of the table. "No?" Sam's voice was barely audible. "No, no, no." Her eyes snapped open, no longer violet, but a burning, hateful red. When she spoke, it wasn't her voice, but a horrifying collage of voices Sam knew intimately. Voices that had screamed in his earpiece during the final moments of the siege of Cygnus X1. "Commander, they're breaking through." The panicked voice of his communications officer. "They're everywhere." The whispered terror of his demolitions expert. "Sam, help us." The pleading final words of his closest friend. The girl's body continued to transform, each change more agonizing than the last. Her limbs stretched and cracked, rearranging themselves into impossible configurations. Her jaw dislocated, extending into mandibles that clicked and chittered. And all the while, those voices, his squad's voices, continued to pour from her in a cacophony of terror and accusation. Sam stood paralyzed, watching as she became not just any monster, but the specific embodiment of his deepest trauma. She wasn't just transforming into a Reaper. She was becoming a living monument to his guilt, his failure, his shame. He fled to the cockpit, slamming the medbay door shut behind him and engaging the emergency lockdown. His hands shook so badly he could barely operate the controls. In the pilot's chair, Sam slumped forward, his breathing ragged, sweat soaking through his shirt despite the ship's cool temperature. His thoughts were interrupted by a tremor that ran through the ship. Not a mechanical failure. This felt alive, deliberate, like something massive shifting its weight. From the medbay came a sound that froze the blood in Sam's veins, a sound he hadn't heard in 5 years, but which still haunted his nightmares. The sound of claws scraping against metal. Sam grabbed his pulse rifle from its mount beside the control panel, checking the charge with trembling fingers. The weapon hummed to life, its familiar weight both comforting and terrifying, a reminder of the last time he'd had to use it in combat. He sprinted down the corridor toward the medbay, heart hammering against his ribs. The door had been torn from its hinges, the reinforced metal crumpled like paper. Inside, in the dim emergency lighting, stood a thing that shouldn't exist outside of nightmares. It was a Reaper, a bioweapon that had wiped out his entire squad during the siege of Cygnus X1. Over 3 meters tall, with a segmented insectoid body balanced on blade-like limbs. Its carapace gleamed wetly in the red emergency lights, and its face, if it could be called that, was a mess of sensory organs and feeding appendages. But this was impossible. The Reapers had been engineered by the Scion Collective, not Omnicorp. They had been quarantined, contained, destroyed, or so the Alliance had claimed after the massacre. Sam raised his rifle, finger tightening on the trigger, when he saw its eyes. Red, burning like coals in that alien face, but within them, something familiar. Something human. The creature writhed, its form constantly shifting, flowing like liquid nightmare from one horrific configuration to another. Sometimes it was the Reaper. Sometimes it became something even worse. Shapes and appendages that violated the laws of biology and physics. And in its eyes, now burning red, Sam saw not rage, but agony. It didn't attack. It suffered. "What the hell are you?" Sam whispered, his rifle still trained on the creature. The thing that had been a blue-skinned girl convulsed, a piercing shriek emanating from somewhere inside its constantly shifting form. But within that inhuman sound, Sam heard fragments of words spoken in the voices of his dead comrades. "Left us to die." Sergeant Miles's accusatory tone. "Why, you? Not us?" Medic Lena's confusion. "So cold." Sam, "So cold." Corporal Way's final words before the Reapers had torn him apart. The sound hit Sam like a physical blow, triggering memories of Cygnus X1, the screams of his squad over the comms, the sound of rending metal and flesh, the hopelessness as they realized nothing could stop the Reapers. And then Sam understood. Her body wasn't stable. It was reacting to his emotions, to his fear. The fire on the Prometheus hadn't harmed her. It had contained her, forcing her to maintain a single form. In the cold and quiet of his ship, next to a man whose subconscious was a minefield of trauma and terror, she had become an echo of his worst fear. Not just reflecting it, but broadcasting it back to him, amplified through the lens of his own guilt. The only solution Sam could think of was to recreate the conditions from the Prometheus. Working with desperate speed, he backed out of the medbay, never taking his eyes off the writhing creature that had followed him into the corridor. It kept its distance, shrieking occasionally when he made sudden movements, but didn't attack, almost as if it were as afraid of him as he was of it. "I'm going to help you," Sam said, unsure if the creature could understand him, or if anything of the girl remained inside the nightmare. "But I need you to stay back." He made his way to the cargo bay, the largest space on the rust bucket, and sealed the creature inside with trembling hands. Then he raced to the engine room, rerouting the reactor's coolant system with reckless modifications that would have gotten him court-martialed in his Alliance days. Steam hissed from improvised vents as he diverted the hot coolant into the cargo bay's ventilation system. He maxed out all the environmental controls, turning the bay into a makeshift sauna. The ship's computer flashed warnings about excessive temperatures and fire risks, which Sam systematically overrode. "Come on," he muttered, watching the temperature gauge climb. "Come on." After a few hours, the shrieking stopped. When Sam peered inside through the heat-resistant observation port, she was herself again. A fragile, blue-skinned girl, curled up on the floor of the cargo bay, her knees pulled to her chest. Sam exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping with relief. But the reprieve was temporary at best. Now they were trapped together. He couldn't turn off the heat, or she would become his nightmare again. She couldn't leave the cargo bay. His ship was damaged, his supplies limited, and he had no doubt that Omnicorp would be looking for their missing experiment. As he watched her through the observation port, Sam realized a terrible truth. It wasn't just the heat that was keeping her stable. It was his own mental state. Every time his thoughts drifted to Cygnus X1, to the Reapers, to his lost squad, her body would ripple and begin to transform, even in the sweltering cargo bay. He needed to heal himself to help her. Sam pulled a storage crate in front of the observation port and sat down, his eyes level with the blue-skinned girl inside. She looked up, those violet eyes meeting his with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "I need to tell you something," Sam said, activating the intercom, "and I need you to listen." He started slowly, hesitantly, speaking about Cygnus X1, but this time, he didn't just tell her about the horror, he told her about before. About Sergeant Miles and his terrible jokes that somehow always made everyone laugh. About Medic Lena, who kept a small garden of medicinal plants in the barracks and dreamed of opening a clinic when her tour ended. About Corporal Way, who could field strip any weapon in the Alliance arsenal blindfolded, and who always shared his extra rations with the newer recruits. As he spoke, something remarkable happened. Inside the cargo bay, Echo's body began to respond to his words, a visible, physical manifestation of their connection. When Sam described Sergeant Miles's laugh, like a rusty airlock with a sense of humor, the razor-sharp spines that had begun to protrude from her shoulders smoothed and receded, her blue skin flowing like liquid metal. "They weren't just soldiers," Sam said, his voice growing steadier. "They were people, good people. And I've spent 5 years remembering only how they died, not how they lived." He recalled the night before the attack, when they'd all gathered for a game of cards. Miles had lost spectacularly and paid his debt by performing an absurd interpretive dance of the Battle of Proxima Station that had them all doubled over with laughter. As this warm memory flowed through Sam, Echo's skin shifted from deep midnight blue to a softer azure, pulsing with gentle bioluminescence. "I was their commander," Sam continued. "I was supposed to protect them. When the Reapers attacked, I followed protocol. I sealed the perimeter, called for backup, deployed the defense grid. Everything by the book." He took a deep breath. But the book was wrong. The Reapers weren't just animals. They were intelligent. They knew our protocols better than we did. They used them against us. As he spoke of the Reapers, dark patches formed across Echo's skin, hardening into segmented plates reminiscent of insectoid armor. Her fingers extended into sharp points and her spine arched in pain. The blue-skinned girl placed her trembling hand against the glass, her expression contorted as she fought the transformation. "No, listen." Sam leaned closer to the glass. "I survived because I broke protocol. I stopped thinking like an Alliance officer and started thinking like a scared kid from a terraforming colony." He described how, instead of retreating to the designated fallback position, he'd remembered the old maintenance tunnels he'd explored. During his first week at the outpost, how he'd crawled through them, guided by the memory of Miles teasing him about getting lost down there. As he spoke of escape, of survival, Echo's form stabilized again. The chitinous plates softened and receded, though they didn't disappear entirely. Instead, they shrank to elegant, symmetrical patterns along her arms and shoulders, like armor that was part of her rather than consuming her. My voice cracked, but I couldn't save them, and I've been blaming myself ever since. For several days, they continued this unusual therapy. Sam would bring her food and water, sliding them through a small transfer hatch designed for cargo inspection. But more importantly, he would sit with her for hours, telling her stories about his life before the war, about his squad, about the small moments of beauty and humanity that he'd witnessed even in the darkest places. With each story, each positive memory he reclaimed from the shadow of trauma, her form responded. When he described his childhood farm, her skin developed subtle patterns like crop rows under starlight. When he recalled the celebration after their first successful mission, golden sparks danced just beneath her surface, mimicking the fireworks they'd improvised from signal flares. Most remarkably, the elements of the Reaper never fully disappeared from her form. Instead, they integrated, transformed. The razor-sharp edges remained but retracted to elegant lines along her forearms. The segmented exoskeleton became a delicate lattice across her shoulders and spine, protective but beautiful. She was learning to incorporate his fear, not just reflect it, to transform it into something they could both control. On the fourth day, as Sam was explaining how Sergeant Miles had once saved an entire outpost with nothing but a pocket knife and a canister of coolant, she spoke. "Why did you save me?" Her voice was soft, melodic, with an accent he couldn't place. Sam stopped mid-sentence, surprised. "You were in trouble. It seemed like the right thing to do." "No!" She shook her head, blue hair floating around her face in the heated air. "Why did you save me knowing what I am?" "I didn't know what you are," Sam admitted. "I still don't, not completely." The girl approached the observation port, placing her delicate hand against the glass. Up close, her skin seemed to shimmer with an inner light, like the surface of an ocean under twin moons. "What do you fear most, Sam?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. "I don't understand." "Yes, you do." Her violet eyes held his. "You saw it. You saw me become it." Sam swallowed hard, memories of Cygnus X1 threatening to surface. But this time, he didn't push them away. He faced them, acknowledged them. "The Reaper." She nodded. "Tell me about it. Tell me why it haunts you." And so, sitting on the cold floor of the corridor, with only a pane of heat-resistant glass between them, Sam told her about Cygnus X1, about how the Reapers had breached their defenses, how they'd moved through the settlement like living shadows, unstoppable and merciless, how he, the sole survivor, had listened to the screams of his comrades over the radio until only silence remained. His fear, his guilt, that was the stuff her monsters were made of. But as he spoke, Sam realized something was different. The memories still hurt, but they no longer paralyzed him with terror. By sharing them, by speaking the names of his fallen friends, and honoring their memories, he was beginning to heal. And as he healed, she stabilized. The most striking change occurred when he described how he'd stood over the bodies of his squad after it was all over, how he'd collected their tags even though procedure dictated he evacuate immediately. As he described this final act of respect, the most Reaper-like elements of her form, the blade-like protrusions along her arms, the segmented ridges along her spine, didn't disappear but rather realigned themselves into symmetrical patterns, like armor worn by choice rather than a mutation born of fear. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time, her expression thoughtful. "Now you," Sam said finally. "Tell me what you are." "My designation is Echo 7, she replied. "I am an empathic mimic created by Omnicorp, a weapon capable of transforming into the fears of the enemy." She gestured to the heated room around her. "The fire is air-set protocol that painfully holds me in a basic humanoid form." Sam processed this, the implication sinking in. "They made you to be a psychological weapon." "Yes, I reflect what terrifies my target, becoming their deepest fear made flesh." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes held a deep sorrow. "I cannot control it. I simply respond." And the scientists on the Prometheus? They feared what they created. A small, sad smile curved her lips. "As they should have." Sam ran a hand through his hair, thinking. "They're hunting you, aren't they? Omnicorp." "No," she replied, her violet eyes meeting his directly. "They're hunting you. I am just the weapon. You are the ammunition." The Prometheus's black box had transmitted a signal before it exploded. Sam discovered this 3 days later when the Rust Bucket's long-range sensors, freshly repaired, detected an approaching vessel on an intercept course. It was faster than his ship, better armed, and broadcasting no identification, the telltale signature of a corporate cleanup operation. "The cleaners," Echo 7 said when Sam told her, her voice tight with tension. "Omnicorp's elite containment unit. Their mission will not be to retrieve me, but to eliminate all witnesses." "Me, you mean?" Sam checked the weapon systems of the Rust Bucket, pathetically inadequate against a military-grade vessel. "How many?" A standard unit is 5 operatives, highly trained, augmented, and equipped with cryotech to neutralize assets like me. Her expression was grim. You cannot fight them, Sam. Then we run. Sam plotted a desperate course through the most dangerous sectors of the asteroid belt, hoping to shake their pursuers. The rust bucket groaned in protest as he pushed its engines beyond safe parameters, the old ship shuddering as it accelerated. What followed was a desperate chase through the hazardous terrain of the Titan's graveyard. Sam used every trick he'd learned in his years as a scavenger, hiding in the electromagnetic shadow of a neutron star's remnant, skimming dangerously close to volatile gas pockets that could mask their engine signature, even doubling back through their own ion trail to confuse pursuit. But he wasn't alone in his efforts. Echo, trapped in the sweltering cargo bay, became his unexpected co-pilot. Through the ship's intercom, she guided him, her knowledge of Omnicorp protocols and tactics giving them a slim edge. They will anticipate standard evasive maneuvers, she warned as Sam prepared to dive into a particularly dense asteroid cluster. The team leader, Mercer, was Alliance Special Forces before Omnicorp recruited him. He knows military doctrine. Sam's hands tightened on the controls. How do you know that? There was a pause before Echo answered. Because they used him to train me. I have absorbed much of his knowledge, his fears. Her voice grew softer. They are very similar to yours, Sam. The implications of that hung in the air between them, unspoken. On the third day of the chase, as the rust bucket lurked in the shadow of a massive derelict carrier, a transmission cut through their comms. A man's voice, calm and measured, with the unmistakable cadence of Alliance officer training. Captain Samuel Reeves, this is Commander Adrian Mercer of Omnicorp Security. Do you copy? Sam's blood ran cold. He hadn't used his full name or rank in 5 years. Nobody was supposed to know who he really was. I know you can hear me, Sam, Mercer continued. We served together at Proxima Station before Cygnus X1. I was 2 years ahead of you at the Academy. Sam glanced at the cargo bay temperature readout. Still stable. Echo was still in her humanoid form. He took a deep breath and opened the channel. What do you want, Mercer? A soft chuckle came through the speakers. There he is, the hero of Proxima Station, the sole survivor of Cygnus X1. A pause. The deserter. I fulfilled my contract, Sam replied stiffly. The Alliance and I parted ways legally. Of course, Mercer's voice was smooth, reasonable. I'm not here to debate your service record, Sam. I'm here about the asset you removed from the Prometheus. The weapon, Mercer corrected. A very expensive, very dangerous prototype that doesn't belong in civilian hands. Sam's jaw tightened. She was chained to a table, being burned alive. A containment protocol, nothing more. The fire doesn't harm E7. It stabilizes her. Mercer's tone became almost sympathetic. Sam, we know what happened on Cygnus X1. It wasn't your fault. The Alliance protocols were flawed. The intelligence was wrong. No one could have saved that outpost. The words hit Sam like a physical blow. The absolution he'd craved for 5 years, offered so casually. Omnicorp has connections, Mercer continued. We can help clear your record, remove the black mark of Cygnus X1. You could serve again, if that's what you want. Or we could set you up somewhere comfortable. A fresh start. In exchange for Echo. Is that what you're calling it? Mercer sounded amused. Yes. Return the asset, and we forget about the Prometheus incident. Everyone walks away happy. Sam glanced at the monitor showing the cargo bay. Echo was pressed against the observation port, her expression one of pure anguish. She could hear the conversation through the ship's intercom. She knew what Mercer was offering. Let me think about it, Sam said finally. Of course. You have 1 hour. The transmission cut off. Sam sat in silence, his mind racing. Redemption, absolution, a chance to erase the stain of Cygnus X1 from his record, from his conscience. All it would cost was one experimental weapon, one blue-skinned girl who looked at him with understanding in her violet eyes. In the cargo bay, Echo began to change, not into the Reaper, but into something formless, fluid, her body rippling and distorting as she slammed herself against the walls, again and again. She was responding to his temptation, his momentary betrayal. Even through the heat, she felt his doubt. Sam watched her suffering for exactly 30 seconds before making his decision. He activated the intercom. "Echo," he called. "Echo, stop! I'm not giving you to them. I promise." She stilled, her form gradually re-solidifying into the blue-skinned girl. She approached the observation port, her movements cautious, uncertain. "They're offering you everything you want," she said, her voice barely audible. "Freedom from your guilt." "No," Sam shook his head. "They're offering me a lie. Redemption doesn't come from erasing the past. It comes from facing it." He placed his hand against the glass, mirroring hers on the other side. "And I'm facing it with you." Despite their combined efforts, Sam couldn't fully control his fears. In moments of tension, when the cleaners would close the gap or a particularly dangerous maneuver would strain his concentration, Echo would change. The temperature regulators in the cargo bay would struggle to compensate, and through the observation port, Sam would glimpse her transformation. As they flew through an asteroid field and Sam remembered being trapped in wreckage during the war, Echo transformed into a screeching mass of twisted metal that nearly breached the hull of the cargo bay, sharp edges extending from her body like shrapnel. The sound of her metamorphosis, metal grinding against metal, sent shivers down Sam's spine. But as the chase extended into days, something unexpected began to happen. Sam learned to control his thoughts, focusing on calm, on memories of a home he'd long lost, a small farm on a terraformed moon where he'd grown up watching the gas giant rise over the horizon each morning. In those moments, Echo changed too. Her form became softer, more stable. Sometimes when Sam checked the observation port during these periods of calm, he found her looking almost human, still blue-skinned and alien, but with a solidity that seemed to suggest she was becoming more than just a reflection of his psyche. Their fragile peace ended abruptly when the cleaners caught them in the Spiderweb Nebula, a maze of ionized gas filaments that played havoc with sensors and navigation. Their ship, a sleek black predator against the colorful backdrop of the nebula, was faster, better armed, and piloted by someone who anticipated Sam's every move. "They've locked on," Sam reported grimly as the targeting alert blared through the cockpit. "Preparing for impact." The first volley of shots didn't destroy the rust bucket. They weren't meant to. Instead, they disabled the engines with surgical precision, leaving the scavenger ship drifting helplessly in the nebula's embrace. Through the viewport, Sam watched as the cleaner vessel extended a docking tube, connecting to the rust bucket's airlock with mechanical precision. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. They were boarded before Sam could even reach his weapon. Commandos in black armor stormed inside using cryo grenades that instantly coated the corridors in frost. The temperature throughout the ship plummeted, the environmental systems unable to compensate for the sudden cold. In the cargo bay, where Echo had been contained, the temperature gauge began to drop precipitously. Sam fought as best he could, using his knowledge of the ship's layout to ambush individual cleaners, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. A stun blast caught him in the shoulder, sending him sprawling into the very corridor that led to the cargo bay. As he struggled to regain his feet, the door to the bay slid open, revealing a scene from his nightmares. The cleaner leader, Mercer, removed his helmet as he approached, revealing a face that belonged on a recruitment poster. Handsome, confident, with eyes that held no emotion whatsoever. He stood over Sam, pulse rifle aimed at his chest. "Captain Reeves," he said, his voice the same smooth, reasonable tone from the transmission. "You should have taken the deal." Behind him, in clouds of cold vapor that billowed from the cargo bay, Echo writhed in agony. The cryo grenades had dropped the temperature well below the threshold needed to maintain her humanoid form. She cycled through a kaleidoscope of terrifying forms. The Reaper, spider-like creatures with too many limbs. The ghosts of his fallen squad members, their bodies broken and accusing. As each new form manifested, Sam could see fragments of his squad members' faces momentarily appearing in Echo's constantly shifting visage. Sergeant Miles's stern brow, Medic Lena's compassionate eyes, Corporal Way's determined jaw, each one distorted by pain and accusation before being swallowed by the next nightmarish transformation. Their voices emanated from her in a discordant chorus, sometimes speaking in unison, sometimes overlapping in a hellish cacophony that made the cleaners shift uneasily despite their training. "You shouldn't have interfered, Scavenger," Mercer continued, his eyes locked on Sam's. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." He gestured toward the transforming Echo without looking at her. Do you know what we found in your file? The psych evaluation after Cygnus X1? The nightmares you reported? The survivor's guilt? The flashbacks? He smiled thinly. You're the perfect ammunition for our weapon. Mercer began to describe the deaths of Sam's comrades in excruciating detail. Details that only someone with access to classified Alliance reports could know. He described how Sergeant Miles had been impaled through the chest, still firing his weapon until the last breath left his body. How Medic Lena had locked herself in the infirmary with 3 civilians. How the Reapers had peeled back the metal door like the lid of a can. How Corporal Way had been found in 7 different parts of the outpost. With each terrible detail, Echo's transformations became more rapid, more extreme. The cargo bay filling with a cacophony of shrieks and growls and weeping. She was becoming a storm of Sam's trauma, fed by Mercer's calculated cruelty. Do you know why you survived, Sam? Mercer asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It wasn't luck. It wasn't skill. The Reapers let you live. They were programmed to leave one witness, to spread the fear. You weren't a survivor. You were a messenger. Sam's mind reeled at the implication. The Alliance had known. They had known the Reapers would leave a witness, and they had used him, to spread terror about the new bioweapon. You're lying, Sam gasped. But even as he said it, he knew it was true. It explained why he'd never been court-martialed for abandoning his post, why his official record listed him as honorably discharged despite his desertion. Am I? Mercer's smile widened. We have the files, Sam. We have the recordings. Your squad knew they were bait. They knew they were sent there to die. He leaned closer. Only you didn't know. Plausible deniability, they called it. The revelation hit Sam like a physical blow. His squad, his friends, sacrificed deliberately, and he the unwitting accomplice to their murder. The knowledge should have broken him, should have plunged him into the very depths of the terror and guilt that had haunted him for 5 years. But something unexpected happened instead. Sam understood. He couldn't win by fighting. His fear was their best weapon, turning Echo against both of them. He had to do something he hadn't done in 5 years. Stop being afraid. Closing his eyes, Sam blocked out Mercer's taunts, the sounds of Echo's transformation, even the pain from his injuries. He stopped seeing the Reaper that had haunted his dreams. Instead, he remembered his sergeant's face, laughing at his joke the day before the attack. He remembered the warmth of their camaraderie, not the cold of death. He remembered the farm, the gas giant rising, the simple peace of a life before war. But most importantly, he embraced the truth, the terrible, liberating truth that he had been used, that his guilt had been a tool, a weapon wielded against him by the very institution he had served. The realization didn't absolve him, but it recontextualized his pain. It wasn't just his burden to bear alone. It was the result of a calculated cruelty that extended far beyond Cygnus X1. Echo's transformation slowed. Through slitted eyes, Sam saw the monster begin to lose its shape, the horrific visage melting away like ice under a sun. But it wasn't enough. The cold of the cryo grenades was too pervasive, the cleaner's presence too threatening. Then Sam made his choice. Using the intercom system on his wrist, he opened a channel to the cargo bay. Echo, he called, his voice steady, despite the pulse rifle aimed at his chest. Echo, can you hear me? A garbled, distorted sound came back, part shriek, part human voice, struggling to form words through a constantly changing vocal apparatus. I'm going to help you, Sam continued, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that? The monstrous form paused in its frenzied transformations. In the chaos of limbs and teeth and nightmare shapes, 2 eyes, momentarily violet instead of burning red, fixed on him. The word was barely recognizable, forced through an inhuman throat. Mercer laughed. Touching, but pointless. It can't understand you, not in this state. It's just a reflection, a mirror for your fears. You're wrong, Sam replied, never taking his eyes off Echo. She's more than that now. She's choosing. With a sudden lunge, Sam fired his sidearm, not at Mercer, but at the fuel line running along the wall of the corridor, the line that fed the makeshift heating system he'd created for Echo's containment. But this wasn't a desperate random shot. During his days repairing the rust bucket, Sam had analyzed the chemical composition of the green fire from the Prometheus. He knew it wasn't just a containment measure. It was a catalyst designed to force a reset but potentially capable of so much more in the right circumstances. Green chemical flames, the same kind that had consumed the Prometheus, flooded the bay. The heat was unbearable, the cleaners recoiling from the sudden inferno, their cryotech useless against the chemical fire. "Echo!" Sam shouted over the roar of the flames. "I know what you are now. Not just a weapon, a person. Not just an echo, a voice. This is your chance. Choose what you become." An echo. She stepped into the fire. Before Sam's eyes, she transformed again, but not into a nightmare. Her body stopped writhing and took on a new final form. She grew taller, her skin taking on the hue of tempered steel. No longer blue, but a shimmering metallic silver that reflected the green flames around her. Yet the transformation wasn't a complete departure from what she had been. The Reaper's influence remained, now integrated rather than dominant. Her limbs elongated, becoming sleek and powerful, retaining the deadly sharpness of the Reaper's blades, but with a grace and purpose that spoke of conscious control rather than blind terror. The segmented exoskeleton that had once made her monstrous now formed an elegant armor across her torso and shoulders, each plate catching the firelight like burnished metal. Wings woven from pure flame sprouted from her back, stretching the length of the cargo bay, each feather a tongue of fire that moved with deliberate, hypnotic rhythm. Where the wing bones met her shoulders, they fused with the Reaper's blade-like protrusions, creating a hybrid structure that was both beautiful and lethal. Her face, once featureless in her monstrous form, now held a terrible beauty, alien and familiar at once, with eyes that burned not with mindless rage, but with focused intent. She was no longer an echo of his fear. She had become the embodiment of his will to protect, his determination to face the truth, his refusal to be used as a weapon any longer. She was transformation itself, pain reforged into power. The Reaper was still there, but now it served her, a part of her strength rather than her prison. Mercer's composure finally broke. "Impossible," he whispered, raising his rifle. "The containment protocols." He never finished the sentence. With movements too fast to follow, Echo was upon him. One moment she stood in the flames, the next she had crossed the distance between them, her blade-like fingers closing around Mercer's throat. The other cleaners opened fire, but their shots passed harmlessly through her flame-wreathed form. The fight was brief, violent, and absolute. When it was over, the black-armored bodies lay scattered across the frost-covered deck, and Echo turned to Sam. She was no longer a fragile girl. She was something else, beautiful and deadly. A guardian angel born from his worst nightmares and forged in fire. "We need to move," she said, her voice resonant with new power. "There will be others." They abandoned the rust bucket, too damaged to be salvaged even by Sam's stubborn standards. Using the cleaner's vessel, they made their way to the Shadow, a pirate station on the edge of the galaxy, where no one asked questions and corporate reach was limited by hefty bribes to the local warlords. Echo no longer changed form with Sam's emotions. She remained forever in her new fiery incarnation, a being of metal and flame, drawing stares and whispers as they moved through the crowded, lawless corridors of the station. Some took her for a high-end synthetic, others for an alien species they hadn't encountered before. No one guessed the truth, and Sam wasn't inclined to enlighten them. They found lodging in the station's outer ring, a small compartment with a viewport that offered a stunning view of unfamiliar stars. For the first time since her rescue, Echo seemed at peace, spending hours simply watching the cosmos wheel by. "Worm, what happens now?" Sam asked one evening, as they sat on the station's outer hull, magnetic boots keeping them anchored to the metal surface. The void stretched before them, infinite and full of possibility. Echo looked at her hands, which still glowed faintly with inner heat. "They will not stop hunting us," she said. "Omnicorp does not abandon its investments easily." "Let them come," Sam replied, surprised by his own confidence. The fear that had defined him for so long seemed distant now, replaced by something he hadn't felt since before Cygnus X1. Purpose. Echo turned to him, her gaze thoughtful. "They called me Echo, but an echo only repeats. And I choose for myself now." She held up her hand, a small flame dancing across her palm. Controlled, purposeful. "Call me Spark." Sam smiled, nodding. "Spark it is." He had saved a girl from the fire, not knowing the fire was all that contained her. Now she was free, and so was he. Together they were ready to burn the old world to the ground and build something new from its ashes.